This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW, flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 206, entitled Asian Fluffies. The flyer itself. Asian Fluffies. It's actually a letter to Sandman, a prominent MGTOW. Dear Sandman, I lived 8 years in Japan in the 90s and have currently lived 9 years in China, now 11, so this was written 2 years ago. So I think I know something about Asian women. The Asians, Japs and Chinese, are not a creative people. I call Japs Japs as a way of punishing them for their murdering of 30 million Asians in the 30s and 40s when they went fascist, and still today do not have guilt feelings about what they did. The Japs score a full standard deviation and a half lower on creativity tests than do comparable cultures. And Chinese culture is even worse, being intellectually sterile. 0 science Nobel Prizes, well actually now 1, and to a woman, which makes me suspicious. I suspect it was awarded more for PC reasons than merit. No world-class intellectuals pushing original ideas on the world stage. The only country in the world that does not use an alphabet, due to its lack of freedom of speech, still living in a primitive one-party dictatorship, when 90% of people in the world living outside China live in democracies. So, it's not surprising that the Japs and the Chinese are decades behind the West when it comes to the level of development of gender role expectations. In short, these Asian women are still fluffies, that is, traditional women who expect to be able to parasite off the money of a man, who have the attitude that the man who penises pays. I had 2 very negative experiences with Asian women regarding gender role expectations, one in Japan, the other in China. In Japan, I had a Japanese girlfriend for 7 years, which was the best relationship I ever had. She was the prettiest, the most fun, the most passionate, and she was as smart, but not as educated, as I was. When I moved to the US, she came to see if she could live in the US, and casually remarked to me that she could if I paid for her to do so. That pressed my masculist fluffy button. Once I was convinced she was dead serious, I exploded. Go back to Japan, you fucking Jap fluffy parasite. Go murder some Chinese. And that was the end of that relationship. Some years later in China, I married. I preferred to just live with a woman, but then I would never get long-term resident status, a green card. A Chinese daughter of a general who was on the Long March with Mao Zedong, who handled all my admin things that were in Chinese writing, a writing system that insults my intelligence, since it's an ancient pre-alphabetic script of the kind that the rest of the world abandoned long ago, except for the ultra-conservative Chinese, which reflects very negatively on their culture. After 4 years with her, I had lost patience. This woman turned out to be a rather mindlessly middle-class thief, who read the Chinese equivalent of Reader's Digest, and certainly did not work towards getting a PhD, as she told me she would. Looking back, I think she was very happy to be hitched to a high-status Western male, PhD'd, full prof, who took her as a travelling companion to foreign countries, after she had been single and rather poor for over a dozen years. As my contempt grew towards her intellectual laziness and lack of ambition, the arguments mounted until we separated. I then started trying to collect my finances and discovered that this chink fluffy thief had put 4 years of my savings into shares in her own name. I then got a lawyer to get a divorce and to get my money back, but the Chinese government favours its own citizens, and her sister was a lawyer and a CCP, that's Chinese Communist Party, member, and thus also a daughter of a general who was on the Long March with Mao Zedong. So I did not get my money back. So this chink fluffy thief is now set up for the rest of her life, not having to work, living off the labour of some Western, stupidly trusting sucker. No wonder I have a hatred of fluffy parasites and aim towards wiping them out as a masculist by pushing the idea that it is in the self-interest of masculists/MGTOWs to refuse to have relationships with fluffies. If fluffies want to have a man, they must become FIPs, financially independent persons, and have a career. My current Chinese wife is a true FIP, who's also a professor with her own apartment and car, whose self-image is of being a FIP. I learned my lesson to avoid fluffies like the plague. A fluffy will parasite on you before the divorce and after. Fluffies must rot on the shelf. So, to you younger men reading this, don't have relationships with fluffies. Choose FIPs. They are much easier on your wallet. A FIP is much less likely to parasite on you the way a fluffy will, stealing from you and stripping you of half your assets after a divorce, taking your kids with 90% probability, forcing you to pay alimony and child support in a fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system in North America, etc., which is a major crime against men and needs to be politically purged, one of the many tasks of the masculist movement that is yet to be completed. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channel name De Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers. Ciao.